Shutter's closed. There we are.
All right, so where did we leave off?
The Cobbs. The first Cobb I got there, it was their only Cobb there for about a week.
Yeah.
Crew hated him. He was a dictator. He's one of those guys who tried to keep a file on everybody, and he can basically just made life a living hell. No one, very hard to work for. But the next Cobb, Senior Chief Higgins, he basically made that crew a family. And guys loved him. He actually cared. Everybody could talk to him. We were on the one deployment. He only got off the boat once to go into port because he wanted to make sure he was there to make sure his crew was taken care of. So
yeah,
well loved and respected. There's a follow-on story to that when if we get to it. But
so, what were your first few days on the submarine like?
So one of the first people I met, I think it was Blackwell Sonerman. I get down the hatch, and it's like, welcome to the Minneapolis St. Paul, where it's fueled by hate and discontent and kept together by the rust. Again, refer back to the previous copy. Everyone hated it. It just did not help the situation. And I was thinking about submariners too. There was a guy at the training pipeline prototype. He's like, told me and my buddy, he's like, hey, on a submarine, someone's going to find your button and keep pressing it. One of the two things is going to happen. Either you're going to go crazy or you can get over it. Either way, it's cool. And that is probably the most accurate story I can tell you about submariners. Is you are on a 300-foot metal tube by 30 foot wide with 130 people in it, and you're surrounded by things that are specifically there to kill you. The high power electricity, the high pressure air, the high pressure oil systems, like all this stuff, and of course a nuclear reactor. All these little things, if you don't take care of it, can kill you. And you're surrounded by this stuff 24 hours a day for months at a time, so.
Yeah.
Take it seriously. Excuse me.
So, how big was the crew of your submarine?
So it's on two different boats. The Fast Attack Minneapolis St. Paul, the crew of that was about 130 nominally.
Yeah.
And then the SSBN Rhode Island, I was on the Gold crew. I was a weapons officer there, and that nominally would have about 150 people on there. So.
Yeah. So, do you still remember any of your crewmates?
Quite a few. I'm still Facebook friends with a few of them, and one of my former JOs from the Rhode Island, he just moved back to Minnesota. He's from Minnesota. He just moved back here too. So I've kept in touch with a few of them. I don't go to, because we're now all over the country, because most of my friends were back on the East Coast in Kings Bay, Georgia, or Norfolk, or Hawaii. Well, some of them have just kind of moved around. So Facebook is about the most I'll keep in touch with most people. So I'll tap with them sometimes. Some I know keep in better touch than that, but it just didn't happen with me.
So, going back to the Minneapolis St. Paul, what was the first deployment you went on?
I was only on one deployment, and that was because it was an Atlantic boat. We did an Atlantic deployment. On that deployment, I can say I got the Blue Nose Award. You know what Blue Nose is?
No.
So Blue Nose is. Have you heard of shellback? Shellback polywog. You know what the shellback is?
No, I don't.
So that one's when you cross the equator. If you haven't crossed the equator on a boat or even a ship, you're a polywog. Until you cross the equator, then you become a shellback and you go through a little ceremony. Well, there's one that I went through specifically for my first one was a Blue Nose. Well, that's the Arctic Circle. So if you go above the Arctic Circle, I don't know if there's a term for it, but I got to go become a Blue Nose. But then, so that was the first half of deployment. And then I remember we pulled into Plymouth, England for Christmas, and then that's where this black Iron Man comes in. During or just after Christmas in 2006, so it's about halfway through deployment.
Yeah. We're
leaving Plymouth, England. So a lot of things came up that came into play here for us. And when we came into Plymouth, England, we came in at night, so we didn't really see a lot very well, right? So you can still, Kids better know when. So you have the buoy, so you can kind of see where the channel is. You know where you're going to be safe.
Yeah.
But we didn't see all the other features around the water. And what's special about Plymouth is at the mouth of that river, you have a breakwater.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what a breakwater is? It's about what it sounds like. So like you have the winds coming in from the, I don't know if that's the North Sea or the English Channel or whatever. You have all the waves coming from there, but the breakwater calms it down as you're getting ready to go into the river.
Yeah.
And make it a lot easier. Well, we're not really used to that. You know, it's not something that we dealt with before. When we're leaving, the weather was choppy that morning that we were leaving. So it was December 27th. And we're like, it's kind of hairy, but the Brits were like, yeah, we do this all the time. Well, we didn't really know much about that. And we're getting ready to leave. Part of the standard submarine operations at that time is anybody who goes, I'll actually show a picture here. See this? Yeah, you can see here. So this is what we're calling selling. We're sending people topside. And you notice none of them are tied on right now, right?
Yeah.
Normally, back at that point in time, we would have guys have basically safety lines with breakaways on them, right? So they'd actually put into the hole. There'd be a strip of metal that you hook into that, and this line would basically come with you. If you get washed over, the idea was you'd still be attached to the submarine and you should be able to be recovered.
Yeah.
Now, we saw this as horrible weather. So we actually normally we'd have a lot of people up topside because what's going to happen is we have a river pilot who's used to this river very well. He knows it very well. He knows how this boats maneuver. He's going to be up in the conning tower up here. And then after he got to a spot where he felt comfortable that we could get out, he'd run down and go to this hatch back here, climb up the hatch, get transferred off to like a tugboat or something, and then go along his merry way, and we get out, finish getting out.
Yeah.
Because he didn't trust us as much as he might have trusted one of his own boats to get out safely, he stayed out longer than he normally would have. Okay. We took a precaution. We didn't have as many people topside. We just basically had the chief of the boat and one or two other guys there to basically help with the transfer, just so they could basically, the tug could send like a bridge, a little walk plank over, send the guy over, and fine. But this is all just kind of hairy water. The water's crazy. As we're getting ready to do this, guys finally up there, we're actually coming, what we think is, so you see the breakwater here. Here's the river, here's the breakwater essentially.
Yeah. So
we think, okay, and then the path leads us out this way. So we're thinking that we're sitting about here. Actually, I think we're right back here, right? And we think, okay, you kind of think, okay, we're in line this way, we should be safe. What we didn't take into account was the wind direction, which basically made the waves come this way. So basically, once we got to about here, waves started crashing over the boat. Our backs were turned to it because they're basically doing the transfer on this side because it's easier for the tugboat to basically do a transfer from the lee side, from the side which we're protected by the submarine.
Yeah.
It makes sense, but no one was watching the other side. Waves come over, wash over the cog, wash over our first lieutenant, and they're tied onto the boat.
Yeah.
This is Norfolk Land water, pretty cold. I think it's in the 50s. And they got washed over, but they're still attached to the boat. So we're trying to, it's pandemonium there for a bit. We're trying to figure out what's going on. We have our oncoming XO, who's on the scope, calling people man overboard. I'm on the radio trying to talk to the Brits, trying to figure out what's going on with everybody. We had water washing over to our hatch, coming down into the submarine, and on the lower levels, we have a battery.
Yeah.
Battery and salt water. What do you think would happen?
Not good.
Chlorine gas. So thankfully there is some seal there, but if that water got much higher and anything were to leak in, we could have had like a chlorine gas get into the boat.
Yeah.
It has happened before to other submarines with batteries. It's just one of those dangers. Guys were getting hurt. One guy got the hatch, which is this huge hatch, basically dropped on his head. we had divers go up, try and rescue. We had 2 divers go up, and they got washed overboard almost immediately.
Yeah.
Other guys go up there, and they try to pull him up. The cow was a huge guy. The first attempt, they were big guys. Finally, they were able to cut him free, and they were picked up right away by these chase boats, right? So we had a tug and 2 little, basically, the rib boats, the inflatable boats, go pick them up.
Yeah.
And part of my job then was to try and go on the radio, try and figure out what's going on. Once they realized that I wasn't hearing their conversations, they finally were able to basically do a relay because our radio wasn't strong enough, and they said, okay, these guys have been taken in, and then both of them ended up passing. So on that day we lost our 2 sailors. So when we got back from deployment, that band was to commemorate them, and that was one of the hardest times for us. So that Cobb basically brought the crew together as a family, and I told you it was at that port was the one time, like just basically the day before that, he got out on the town with his chief's quarters once, just so the chiefs could basically show their appreciation for him. The whole crew loved him. And then just kind of seeing how the mourning process went for us, we made our way down to Rota, Spain, and we were there for 3 weeks doing just repairs, trying to get all that water out, get everything fixed again, because we took a lot of damage there from that.
Yeah.
But also emotionally repair, and then also the process of then having to basically lose our captain as well, and damn near lost our engine or nav for that as well. They didn't, I think both of them ended up being fine, but that captain, he basically lost his career after that. One of the things on a submarine is anything bad happens, it's the captain. The captain knows that, and all he asks usually is to be there for the last few minutes of his career. He was up in the bridge, and there's some confusion on what we did. Now, I actually got to be a part of the investigation that happened afterwards. And I was still fairly raw at this point. I had been on the boat for about a year. And they're doing the investigation, like, were guys tied on, and like looking at the book or procedure, like, yeah, they're supposed to be tied on, they're doing that. But what we found out, and what Al was able to help testify to, is guys who got washed over, they lived. Even the pilot, he tried to get off again, but he got washed over, he got picked up, and he was just fine. There's the guys who were attached who then got beat. And also previously there was no guidance to what wave heights you should consider unsafe.
Yeah.
And after that, so immediately after that, you saw, okay, got wave height guidance for the SSNs, SSBNs, and also if you're being surrounded by good chase boats with good capability, don't tie your guys on. It's still up to the captain, but don't tie your guys on, because they're more likely to get picked up and live if they don't do that, than if you were to try and tie them on. Now, if you're in the middle of open ocean and nothing around, like, okay, it's probably better to try and keep them on, because the ability of a submarine to maneuver, we practice it, but the ability of a submarine to maneuver, to get a man overboard in the middle of the ocean with the tools that we have, it's much less likely to recover. But if we have people around us, do that. So I actually got to see some procedures change because of that.
Yeah.
And what happened with that. So when we got back from deployment that April, I believe, we all got to see and hug Cobb's wife. She was on the pier, for us all at the end. And so one of the last gifts he gave us. So yeah.
So how long did that deployment last?
That was a 6-month deployment. I only was there for 5 months of it because I got sent to a school for anti-terrorism officers. So I was out away from the boat for a month. I actually met them up in Rota, Spain the first time we were there.
Yeah.
I met them there and got to go on from there, which apparently was good because they had what they called Sea State 5 going into Brest, France. I missed that, thankfully, and that's where they're on the surface. Submarines, understand, are not meant to be on the surface. Old school ones you see in World War II movies, they're basically converted like surface boats in a way. They're meant to run on the surface for the most part and dive for attacks and for some stealth and survivability. Modern day submarines that are meant to be submerged, that's where they run the best. just the shape of the hull,
Yeah.
you will rock some. On a heavy sea state like that, like sea state 5 is like the worst sea state, you're on the surface, you have people on the scope, you have some people in the bridge even, just getting pelted with rain and water. And because the boat's rocking so much, over half the crew's out seasick, so they had anybody who could stand standing watch. It was just miserable, and I missed that thankfully.
Yeah.
But, you know. So that was about 6 months. I guess I got back in April. And the normal procedure after that is, after you get back from deployment, you take the crew, split it in half. Okay, which half vacation are you guys going to take? Because you'll usually get 2 weeks to basically go on liberty.
Yeah.
And they have a skeleton crew. They're going to do very little stuff. Maybe have like some offshore people come in, do some work in the submarine. You know, just to get some work on it as you do your preparations to get to the next, your next deployment, whatever. You start that next cycle up. And that was one of the last few times though where they actually, I don't know how often they do it now for surface boats, or for the fast attack submarines, but we actually had a lot of the family there, so they knew when we'd get back. They might have had a little heads up, but now for operational security and also for the SSBNs, you get back when you get back, and the wives may get like a notice that day, oh, by the way, your husbands are coming back today, get your welcome home stuff ready. So.
Yeah. And so, how long was it before you went on your next deployment?
So that was the only deployment I got to go on with the Minneapolis St. Paul. It was like they went through a shipyard period, got on deployment, and then they got moved out to Pearl Harbor, and in Pearl Harbor is where I actually started doing the studying for. So one of the things you study for as a naval officer, as a submarine officer, is you also study for this prospective nuclear engineering officer. Mm-hmm. It's where you kind of get detached from the boat for a few months, and you're just studying all the nuke manuals as hard as you can, and then you go and you take a written test, and you go do interviews back in DC. So I'm back in DC again, interviewing all these really smart people who design the stuff. So we're asking questions. What was I thinking when I designed this breaker this way? Like, oh shit! So you had to make sure you read everything.
Yeah.
What's hard for me for that is my boat was so old. It had one of the older style reactors, and I was the only one in that P&EO class who had that style reactor. So all these guys are talking about like how they're handling these things. Like my boat was so old. We actually we saw characteristics in that nuclear reactor you don't normally see. So. How much do you know about nuclear power?
Not that
Be honest,
much.
that's fine.
Yeah.
So that's fine. So the essence of nuclear power is you have a hot rock which makes hot water. You keep that water pressurized so it's not boiling, or boils only a very little bit. That hot water then goes and makes other water hot into steam, and they use that steam then to push turbines either for main engine or for energy.
Yeah.
So that's basically hot rock, boil water, make steam, steam pushes things. Well, as your hot rock gets older, as you use more and more of it, you're building up these things called poisons. All right, and poison is how nuclear reaction works. But as you want one neutron to go into an atom, split that atom up, and have it send out one neutron again. Now, it doesn't actually do that exactly, but you try and basically do an average of everything. One neutron hits one atom, which causes one neutron to come off. It releases a bunch of energy, and you try and control that reaction. Through the process of this, though, those reactions are also releasing what we call poisons, which would then absorb extra neutrons. Well, that means we have to now raise the rods up more to get more fuel exposed so that the reactor can be as hot as we need it to be. And that also leads to certain other funny phenomenon as you get, as you're doing some of the maneuvers that we normally would do. It's like if you run for a high power for a long time, you're also building up these poisons. And it could have been, if we would have had to shut down at sea, we might have had to wait almost a day to be able to start back up again.
Yeah.
If we didn't start up at a certain amount of time, because the poisons would just been like so much that we couldn't get enough neutrons going in the first place. Mm-hmm. So it was a really crazy time. And going through our last reactor safe starters exam, the people were kind of nervous seeing how we had to operate. So we were so old. So that one, I went on one deployment and did a transit from Norfolk to Pearl Harbor, which is the next closest thing. So
Yeah.
from that, I also got the Order of the Ditch, which is going through the Panama Canal, and the Order of the Spanish Main, which is going through the Caribbean. So that'd be the closest thing. We stopped in San Diego and went to Pearl, and that's where I got my dolphins. I got that picture on the bridge. So
Yeah.
on the Rhode Island. So going through my career path was you do your training, you do a JO tour, and then you do a shore tour. My shore tour was at a place called ComSub Land, ComSub 4. They changed their name a couple times when I was there. And then you find out if you get selected to be a department head. I was selected to be a department head, and I think I wanted to be basically, okay, a weapons officer in Kings Bay, and I wouldn't have been fine with that. That's what I ended up getting. How the training pipeline goes for department heads, at this point in time, I'm a full lieutenant. They send you to a 6-month course now of submarine tactics, essentially. At this point in time, I've basically passed my engineer qualifications, so I could be the engineer if they really need me to, but I didn't do it good enough, so they didn't really want me to be the engineer, and I'm okay with that, because that's a different headache. How are we doing time? Perfect, 20 minutes. Went back to 6 months in Groton, Connecticut, and basically just learned all sorts of like submarine tactics, how to do different parts. I learned how to do all the different like navigation weapons jobs. So I did that. All departments had to go through that, but I was a strategic weapons officer. Strategic weapons officer. So I also had to go through another like 6 months training for that, where I'm learning now all the nuclear weapons protocols, and where I'd get locked in a room, I would study all this stuff. And then I'd do interviews with different boat captains about, okay, here's my stuff, here's what I learned about nuclear weapons, and like here's how captains would want to teach me how to do this sort of stuff. And part of that too was I also got to do an extra, what would they call a PUEPS ride. Most other department heads, once you pass department head school, you get thrown in your boat, you get a little turnover, but now you're the guy. What I had to do was I had to go to somebody else's boat and then learn that job, because it's not something you just pick up, because there are different parts of it, because you want to make sure the person who's taking over as weapons officer knows how to, from day one, conduct a nuclear war. If you've seen the movie Crimson Tide, I was the Viggo Mortensen, where running all the weapons departments, and I would have my own trigger that after the captains and the XO have turned their keys and basically give their authorization for launch, it was my job to basically to press the trigger to make sure the missile is launched off in the right windows. So
Yeah.
that was the extra timing there. There I went one patrol on the Maryland. It was. I did 5 or 6 patrols. Actually, the pin here. So that's what this is. It's a patrol pin. So I got my first patrol pin for just going out on the Rhode Island, and then you add on another one of these stars every time you do a patrol. But I think I'm actually missing one because I didn't put one on after my last patrol.
Yeah.
Because that's how I end up getting out of the Navy. So I had a medical issue. So.
Yeah. So while you were on all of these deployments,
Mhm.
what was an average day like for you?
So that actually changed while I was in the Navy. In the Memphis St. Paul, back in the 2005 to 8 time range, we ran off a 24-hour clock, and you had 6-hour blocks. So they had watch sections, and you'd be on. They had 3 watch sections. So I say like the 6 to 12 watch. You say I would still watch 6 to 12. And then there'd be another watch 12 to 6, another watch 12 to 1800, then 1800 to 2400, and then I'd be on again from 2400 to 6, and then I'd be off from 6 to 1800 and 1800, and then I'd say another watch 1800. So I'd always be shifting. So you try and watch how your schedule was, but you'd be constantly shifting your schedule. You'd be on, it's an 18-hour schedule, right? So you'd be on 6, off 12. In that off 12, you try and find some time to do your qualifications and your eating and your studying, but then also try and get a few hours of sleep before your next watch. One time I was what they would call port and starboard. I would have watch from 6 to 12. I'd be off from 12 to 6, 12 to 18, and then I was on again from 18 to 24. Well, one time I was on this port and starboard watch session for international watch. So I'm watching the reactor. It was a tactical training day. So I was the battle station's engineer after watch. So I got off watch. They called it right after lunch. I'm like, shit. So I basically had lunch, went to the bathroom, went back to relieved as engineer after watch, and I stood another 6 hours there.
Yeah.
And then they secured it at dinner time. So again, let me just relieve me so I can go over to the bathroom and get something to eat, go and do that again quick, come back, and I basically stood 18 hours straight of watch. Well, one thing that they've realized is after too many boats were trying to do too much, guys were getting tired and actually hitting things. Because guys are just not sharp and they're trying so hard, and most submariners aren't going to admit that they can't do something because we have no choice. Another thing about defining feature about submariners is, like on a carrier, you have people whose job it is to fight fires. You have people whose job it is to...
The time is 7:45, and the Maple Grove Library will be closing in 15 minutes. Please save your work and print your documents.
People whose job it was to advise people about the careers. On a submarine, everyone had to have like multiple jobs. You didn't just have one thing. After enough times where guys were running themselves ragged and realized, okay, wait a minute, sleep cycle actually matters, we shifted one during patrols on the Rhode Island to do 8-hour watches. And so we'd have basically a 24-hour day. So you're on for 8 hours, you'd be on like 06 to 1400 all week. On the weekend, you somehow shift around, and then you might be 1400 till 2000 or whatever. And you do that for a week, and then you shift, so you'd be on a more consistent schedule. You'd always have 8 hours off, and it'd be a lot better for people. So, training days always suck, but that's a different thing. What was the original question? What was your day like? So we always had meals at 6, 12, or just before beds, like 5, 11, 17, and 23. 2300 always the mid-rats, and that could always be fun. That's when they have like the chicken wheels or just all fun stuff.
Yeah.
One guy on a boat had a standing order to the cooks: anytime you're serving biscuits and gravy, you had better wake me up, because he just loves biscuits and gravies. I couldn't stand it. So food was a big part, really was a big part of the morale of the crew.
Yeah.
So we'd always would try and do well with that.
Yeah. So what were your general living conditions like? Where'd you sleep and?
So I showed you a picture of the rack. And that was the benefit of being an officer. So I'd have my own rack. Being an officer too, I also had a little bit more storage for my personal gear. I'd have like a locker, that sort of stuff I could put some stuff in.
Yeah.
But the junior enlisted guys, they didn't have it so great. They would have 2 racks, 2 beds for 3 guys, and then most junior guy would be told, well, I'm the senior guy, you have to go move to the other one while the other one's on watch. So they'd have them set up in different watch sections, and they'd have basically these rack pans. So basically under the rack, it would lift up, and then you could store stuff. Now, being an officer, I didn't have that. I had a actual stand-up locker, so didn't have a whole lot of space. You might, for the fast attack, you might have a few clothes for going out into town, and you always keep like your dress uniform just in case. For the boomers, you just took the stuff you needed, because you weren't going to go anywhere. You weren't going to do port calls. Because honestly, who wants nuclear weapons in their ports? And we didn't want to put their nuclear weapons on their ports, so we just wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So, we officers had what they had, the wardroom. That's where we did a lot of our training, but also that's where we had our meals. Crew would have the crew's mess. Now, we could, being an officer quarters, the wardroom, we could kind of just eat a little bit more lazily. It'd be served family style, so they bring the bowl out and you take what you want and then go on with that. In the crew's mess, they basically kind of serve it more cafeteria style, where they go put their food on the plate, go sit down, eat quick, and then get out of there, because now we're waiting for the rest of the 130 guys to cycle through. So yeah, better to be an officer on a submarine, but the crew, it was still a big family, and it all worked out pretty well. But,
so since you were mostly deployed during the 2000s, was your unit ever mobilized for the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan?
Before I was there, St. Paul was one of the first boats to actually launch a TLAM. I think in original in 91 Gulf War, but we did not see any of that action. We had that capability, but one of the things you have to realize with the band of St. Paul only had basically those 2 tubes, and you always had to keep some of those for torpedoes. So at theory, we could launch 4 TLAMs, but it would take us longer to reload those and do stuff. what they eventually had is the 688I, so I was just on a 688 class. The 688Is had an improvement where they actually had, like, I think, 8 vertical launch tubes. So they had tubes, vertical launch tubes, kind of like the boomers, but they were dedicated only to Tomahawks and
Yeah.
to launch off. And then they also had their torpedo tubes for the torpedoes as well. But yeah, I never saw any of that. And obviously, I didn't do anything of note on the Rhode Island, because if I did, you would have heard about it, and you would be sitting in this nice building. Only half a joke there, but yeah. So I didn't get to see any action. Most of my job I was doing was reconnaissance at best, and some joint operations with the Coast Guard and a Navy frigate for second half of my patrol deployment with me up to St. Paul. But like I said, didn't really do anything of note. So I never got into a firefight. I never really feared for my life on any of the things. So I didn't have any of those experiences I didn't talk about.
Yeah. So besides the ones you've already talked about, what are your most just iconic memories of your career while deployed?
The first halfway night on the Rhode Island, I won the halfway night poker tournament while I had a My Little Pony as a card. My wife sitting up in the halfway box sent me these My Little Ponies. Like, God. So my mindset is, if I'm embarrassed by this, she wins. I can't have that. So I had that My Little Pony as my card here. So I won the poker tournament that year. But a lot of it's just the great guys. Like I remember one specifically standing opposite. There's a couple times when I was standing opposite the deck. Once in the St. Paul, we're leaving Pearl, and you're trying to balance all these things. I have radio yelling at me, we need to send off these messages, otherwise we're in trouble. I have the assistant navigator yelling at me, we need to be at this point here, we need to be submerged by this time here, or we're going to be in trouble. And then finally, you're just kind of synthesizing all this. Captain, here's my plan. At this point, I'm going to set a tripwire for here. I'm going to do this by this time. If not, I'm going to go do this. And radio was like, I told Captain on the plane, like, very well, off the deck. And then as I'm going down, I see all this thing. Captain, I see this crazy thing out here. I don't know what it is. We're all done. I'm turning to search command. Very well, off the deck, submerge the ship, and you just kind of go. Everything's just kind of like, yeah, this is crazy, but I'm handling it, and it's great.
Yeah.
Another situation whereas we're trying to do an operation, and for some reason on the Rhode Island, we were detecting boats. We were not getting the initial detections for boats until they were way closer than we wanted them to be. And like, Captain, I don't like this area. I'm going to go back to where good water is. He's like, very well, Weps. It's good water. And it was just crazy time. It was like when you recognize the situation, but you get out of there safe. But most of the time is you're doing 5 knots to nowhere. You're just kind of punching holes in the water and nothing's happening. So you just kind of go there. And then another cool thing I did on my last patrol with the Rhode Island, we did an underway exchange of command. Normally you do your patrol, you come in, you change command because you have Luko, Roku, you basically get the bulwark back up and send it back out. Well, Captain's like, hey, if someone decided just to block up our shipping lanes, we couldn't be able to get in and we'd be stuck out there. How about we figure out a way to do an underway exchange of command? And we pulled that off for the first time, and that was just so neat to be able to do that. And my last side of the boat is as it's steaming away, and I'm with my wardroom on this other boat, like, we might have had some drinks from our Peruvian boat that we probably shouldn't have had, but you know what? We might have. I can't ever say that we did.
Yeah.
So those would be my biggest memories. But otherwise, a lot of it is just like TDM, talking to the guys, hearing them tell their stories when we're standing on watch, staring down random people. I had my little game as a web, so it's like, okay, request a checkout, and I would just stare them down.
Yeah.
And as soon as they got, okay, I'm just kidding, what do you got? And, I start to do my checkouts with them. And part of it is like, you're always trying to share your knowledge, and then also checking the knowledge of everybody else, because until you had your dolphins, you didn't mean shit on the boat. Because the dolphins mean, you could help fight this boat. Like, if something bad's going down, like there's a fire, there's another emergency, some of the dolphins have shown that they have the requisite knowledge to help you fight the boat and keep the people inside the boat alive.
Yeah.
So that's why it's an important thing for the submarine community. That's what that means, because we don't have anywhere else to go.
Mm-hmm.
We have only our tolerance procedures and our willingness to take action. So.
Yeah. So what was the last patrol that you went on?
again, it was Rhode Island, did the underway exchange command, again, nothing happened on my patrols, otherwise you would have known about it.
Yeah.
And that's honestly how it was. You go out there, you make the missiles ready, and you hope nothing happens.
And do you remember how you were discharged?
Yeah, my heart stopped on me. Thankfully it happened when I was, on shore. Yeah, I have a pacemaker right now. I was on shore doing Taekwondo
Yeah.
with my son, and then my heart stopped, and then I woke up in the hospital a few days later. They told me what happened. Got the pacemaker in. I thought, oh, maybe I have a chance.
7:55 and Maple Grove Library will be closing in 5 minutes.
So I might have a chance to
Please save
stay
your
in.
work and print your documents at this time, as the library computers will shut off at 8 o'clock.
So I had a chance to stay in, but no, I got discharged, got medical discharge from the Navy, got out March 29th of 2015, moved back here, and been doing that pretty much ever since. Been here ever since.
Yeah.
So,
Did you find that you ever missed anything about military life?
I know my wife especially misses I'm gonna start putting stuff away here so I don't get long. But I know my wife misses the camaraderie with the families. Because when we moved here, yeah, I had my family close to me, but it wasn't the same.
Yeah.
Because military families, submarine families especially, they know how hard it is for everybody else, always kind of going through things. So you needed something, you tell one of the other families, it'd get taken care of.
Yeah.
So, but here, you have neighbors, you get to know them, and maybe they'll do some stuff for you, but it's never the same.
Yeah.
The working conditions, you make some friends there that you just, the things that happen there are just kind of crazy. The best way of explaining it. It's just different. So,
Yeah.
you don't get anywhere else because you're in a situation, you look at a guy across from you and